Welcome to This Week in Hastings Headline History, where we take a look back at what was making news in Hastings, Florida over a century ago. These stories are out of the pages of the Hastings Herald, which was published weekly in the early 1900s. So sit back and enjoy the articles that were making news in the July 25th, 1919 edition. Florida is now able to boast oil wells. Mayor R.M. Burt has returned from a 10-day trip in West Florida from over the oil lands of this state. His trip embraced the counties of Calhoun, Jackson, Washington, and Bay, and judging from his statements and arguments, he has seen something worthwhile in that section of the state. Of course, his statements of the great quantity of gas to be found in that section is reasonable to believe, as it is close to Tallahassee. But whether it is natural or political gas, it has been left to the specialists to say. When interviewed by our reporter, Mr. Burt went on to say, "If any man has any doubt about there being oil in Florida, all he has to do is visit that territory around Chipley and Mariana and use his eyes. There is simply no argument to it, and when you burn the natural gas, see the actual seepage of oil, pick up oil shale and burn it, see dug wells with useless water because of the oil scum, and see sand hills in a flat country blown open with rocks sticking out from gas explosions, you about make up your mind in favor of the oil. One of the most convincing sights is to go to Chipley and see the preparations that are being made by the Pan American Oil Company, said to be the Standard Oil Company, where drilling has actually started. The derrick is 115 feet high, drilling a hole 22 inches. The driller stated he was prepared to go down 6,000 feet, but thought he would get oil at 3,500 feet. The excitement over the prospect is greater and greater every day, and many new people are moving in, and land values are moving up rapidly. Mr. Burt says he may be gassed in just seeing things, but if you will go look for yourself, you will doubtless go him one better. Yelverton lad accused of murder of Negro chauffeur near Baltimore. Clarence Cothran, son of Marion Cothran of Yelverton, and his alleged wife Grace were arrested by Sheriff Hagan in this city on information charging them with the murder of a Negro chauffeur in the woods near Baltimore, Maryland on June 11th. Baltimore Police Department had sent descriptions of the parties wanted together with their names. They knew that Cothran had formerly lived at Yelverton and sent word to Sheriff Hagan as to the parties being headed this way. It seems that early in the morning of June 11th, two men and a woman engaged a motor car in Baltimore to take them to a point near Washington. The driver of the car had but recently received his discharge from the Army. The chauffeur did not return with the car, and the owners, thinking he had stolen it, reported the matter to police. Several days later, some school children discovered the dead body in the woods, and this being reported, it was upon investigation found to be the body of the missing chauffeur. He had 3 bullet holes in the back of his head. The suspected parties were not heard from again until the 8th of the present month, when they are known to have passed through Baltimore, where they had kidnapped a little 10-year-old girl named Mamie Groscup. Sheriff Hagan has been on the watch for Cothran and keeping still. Last Monday morning, he saw the parties driving up Lemon Street and arrested them. Cothran was taken to the jail, and the woman was held at the courthouse for questioning. She admitted that she knew of the murder, that she and her husband were some distance from the car in the Maryland woods getting a lunch, and that the murder was committed by their companion Landers. The little girl is here, and Sheriff Hagan has her. Cothran left here some 6 months ago. He had been in several shady enterprises before this. The woman is young and comely and has a police record. Landers, their companion on leaving Baltimore, is a well-known crook. Hastings land survey secured by R.M. Burt. Hastings will soon have the thing that it has been trying to get for the past 3 or 4 years. Through correspondence by Mayor R.M. Burt, the government has accepted the bid for about 40,000 copies of the land survey that was recently gotten out by the Department of Agriculture. Since Hastings has no board of trade, this will enable the real estate men to hand out something that is of interest to the tourists, who are always inquiring about the famous Hastings lands and surrounding country. These pamphlets have pictures, information as to the contents of the soil, and in fact everything that will interest the home seekers as well as the home people. Auto smash on road. Chaz Ruggiero's Buick car is in the repair shop, damaged to the extent of $200 or more as the result of a collision on the Hastings Road Sunday night. J.N. Snyder of Cocoa, in an Overland car, attempted to pass Mr. Ruggiero, and with a burst of speed, his car shot forward, but he miscalculated on the margin of space. So instead of passing clear of the Ruggiero car, the fender of his car locked in a wheel of the other car, tearing it off and doing considerable damage. The Snyder car was also partly wrecked, but fortunately the occupants of both cars escaped injury. Mr. Rogero was accompanied by his 2 daughters and baby, also by his son-in-law, and they were en route to the beach. When the Overland came alongside, he pulled to one side, giving more than half the road to it. The Buick fender was torn off, the rear housing twisted, and the transmission case broken. The Overland lost 2 tires. It plunged into a ditch. Making new office. The Hastings Auto Supply Company, which is now under new management, has decided to move their offices to other parts of the building and decorate them to its fullest extent. J.R. Slim Knight is the decorator. A.W. Corbett of St. Augustine, who is the chairman of the county commissioners, was here Tuesday inquiring into the heavy traffic reported over the bricked highway. He issued warnings to parties hauling heavy timber on the road. Many soldiers called up in World War I were still making their way home after the ending of the war, and notice of their return was often noted in the articles in the Herald. Here are a few of them. Home from France. Emmanuel Brubaker returned to his home at Federal Point from the Army last Wednesday. While in the service of Uncle Sam, he spent most of his time in France, where he was in the hot part of it. He is to be congratulated on the splendid record he has made for himself while in the service in France and upon coming out without any serious injuries. Returned from France. Leslie Masters returned from the Army last Wednesday with an honorable discharge that he says he is very proud he has served his time in the Great War and is glad to get back home. Soldiering agreed with him. Henry Williams, formerly of the local post office staff, more recently of Uncle Sam's Legions, is greeting old friends here again after an absence of about 18 months, 13 of which were spent in France. So great has been the improvement in his physical condition that he is compelled to carry affidavits around with him stating that it is him. The change to outdoor life and the invigorating exercises wrought a wonderful improvement in his condition, and he is carrying many more pounds of hard muscle than at the time he enlisted. He will resume his position at the post office about August 1st. In this week's editorial section, a pep talk from the newspaper after too much rain had fallen in recent weeks. A time for optimism. The farmers are naturally discouraged because of the continued wet weather. As a result of the excessive moisture, the corn crop, taken as a whole, is practically a failure. There are, however, conditions that must be met philosophically, realizing that they do not often occur, and that the odds are usually in favor of the farmer rather than against him. Eventually, a thorough system of drainage will at least greatly aid in meeting similar conditions should they arise again. There is not a good reason for being downhearted. In no section of Florida are farming conditions more favorable than right here in this portion of St. Johns County. Already, the farmers are making plans for next year undismayed by the discouragement of the past season. That's the right spirit. It is better to smile than weep. The Hastings Herald had more than stories you'd find in modern newspapers. It also had local notices that were more of a social report, a way to know what was going on in town. Here are a few from this edition. The many friends of Mrs. D.W. Bailey will regret to learn that she is ill with typhoid fever and her early recovery is hoped for. Lady Ellen sold. M.F. Foster has sold his launch, the Lady Ellen, to George Corbett. Mr. Foster owned this boat for a number of years and changed her from a sailboat to a launch. She is 35 feet long and 13 feet beam. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Hastings Headline History. This podcast was brought to you by Presenting the Past, bringing history back to the present through historic presentations and the sale of treasures from days gone by. This episode was written and produced by me, Michelle Murillo, with the aid of vintage copies of the Hastings Herald. Our theme music this week was the 1919 recording of Dardanella by Ben Selvins Novelty Orchestra. And to wrap up this week in Hastings Headline History, how about a tune from the time? A 1919 hit, a fun one this week, Billy Murray with I've Got My Captain Working For Me Now.
Johnny Jones was a first-class private in the Army last year. Now he's back to business in his father's place. Sunday night I saw him with a smiling face. When I asked why he felt so happy, Johnny chuckled with glee. He winked his eye and made this reply, something wonderful has happened to me. I've got the guy who used to be my captain working for me. He wanted work, so I made him a clerk in my father's factory. And by, I'm gonna have him wrapped in work up to his brow. I make him open the office every morning at 8. I come around about 4 hours late. Everything comes to those who wait. I've got my captain working for me now. He's not worth what I have to pay him, but I'll never complain. I've agreed to give him $50 per. It's worth twice as much to hear him call me sir. While I sit in my cozy office, he's outside working hard. Out in the hall, at my beck and call, with a feather duster standing on guard. I've got the guy who used to be my captain working for me. He wanted work, so I made him a clerk in my father's factory. And by, I'm gonna have him wrapped in work up to his brow. When I come into the office, he gets up on his feet, stands at attention and gives me his seat. Who was it said, revenge is sweet? I've got my captain working for me now. I've got the guy who used to be my captain working for me. He wanted work, so I made him a clerk in my father's factory. And by, I'm gonna have him wrapped in work up to his brow. I built a nice little kitchen in my dad's factory. I've got my captain there doing KP. The Lord has been awfully good to me. I've got my captain working for me